The blood on my wife's face wasn't washing off fast enough. Emma lay unconscious on the hospital gurney, her blonde hair matted with dried blood, her 6-month pregnant belly barely rising and falling with each shallow breath. The doctor's words kept echoing in my head. Internal bleeding, possible miscarriage. We need to operate immediately. Outside in the parking lot, I could hear laughter, the same sick laughter I'd heard when I found her crumpled on the sidewalk outside Miller's grocery. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your location. I should have been there. That's what kept tearing at me as I watched the medical team wheel Emma into surgery. I should have been there instead of working late at the Henderson construction site, hammering nails and laying foundation like I'd been doing for the past 8 years since leaving the military. To everyone in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, I was just another construction worker trying to make ends meet. Just another guy in work boots and a hard hat. They had no idea who I really was. "Sir, are you the husband?" A young nurse approached me, clipboard in hand. Her name tag read Ashley. She looked nervous, like she'd drawn the short straw for delivering bad news. "Yes, that's my wife, Emma. Emma Mitchell. Is the baby okay?" Ashley's face told me everything before her words did. "The doctors are doing everything they can. Can you tell me what happened? The police need a statement." "What happened?" "What happened was that my pregnant wife went to buy groceries and ran into Vincent Romano. What happened was that the 28-year-old son of the biggest crime family in 3 counties decided to have some fun with a woman who couldn't fight back. What happened was that my training, 25 years of Delta Force operations, 3 tours in Afghanistan, countless missions that never made the news, meant nothing when the person I loved most needed protection. She was grocery shopping. I told Ashley, my voice steadier than I felt. Someone attacked her in the parking lot, beat her unconscious, and left her there. Did she know her attacker? I almost laughed. Emma didn't know Vincent Romano from Adam. She didn't know that his family controlled every illegal operation from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia. She didn't know that his father, Tony Romano, owned half the police force and most of the judges. She was just a kindergarten teacher who loved reading bedtime stories and planning our baby's nursery. But I knew Vincent Romano. I'd been watching him for 3 months, ever since he'd started dealing drugs near Emma's school. I'd been gathering intelligence the way I'd been trained, quietly, methodically, patiently. In Delta Force, we called it target assessment. In civilian life, I called it being a concerned husband. I just never thought the target would make it personal. "The thing is," Ashley continued, "the police already talked to some witnesses. They said it might have been a robbery gone wrong. The attacker apparently ran off when some teenagers came out of the store." "Robbery." "Right. Vincent Romano, whose family was worth millions, needed to rob a pregnant kindergarten teacher for her $30 grocery money. But that was how it always worked with the Romanos. Violence first, cover story second." "Where are the police now?" I asked. "They left about an hour ago. Said they'd follow up tomorrow if your wife was able to give a statement." If she was able. That phrase hit me harder than any IED blast in Kandahar. Emma might not wake up. Our baby might not survive. And the police, the same police who'd been in Romano's pocket for 20 years, were already packaging this as a random crime. Dr. Harrison emerged from the surgical wing, his scrubs stained with blood. My blood went cold when I saw his expression. "Mr. Mitchell, I need to speak with you about your wife's condition." I followed him to a quiet corner near the vending machines. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. In Afghanistan, we'd called this kind of lighting truth lighting, because it showed you exactly how bad things really were. Your wife is stable, but there's been significant trauma to her abdomen. We've managed to stop the internal bleeding, but... Dr. Harrison paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell. We couldn't save the baby." The world went silent. Not the kind of silence you hear, the kind you feel. The kind that presses against your eardrums and makes your chest feel hollow. Emma and I had been trying for 3 years to have a child. We'd painted the nursery yellow because we wanted to be surprised. We'd already picked out names. Michael for a boy, Grace for a girl. Now there would be no surprise. No Michael. No Grace. No future that didn't include the memory of Vincent Romano's laughter echoing through a hospital parking lot. When will she wake up? I managed to ask. Probably tomorrow morning. The anesthesia needs time to wear off. Mr. Mitchell, I have to ask, do you have somewhere safe to stay? Sometimes with cases like this, the attacker. He won't be coming back? I said quietly. Dr. Harrison nodded, probably thinking I meant we'd be extra careful, maybe stay with relatives for a while. He didn't know that Vincent Romano would never hurt another innocent person again. He didn't know that I'd spent a quarter-century learning exactly how to make sure of that. As I sat in the chair next to Emma's hospital bed, watching her breathe through the oxygen mask, I made a decision. For 8 years, I'd been Mike Mitchell, construction worker, husband, soon-to-be father. I'd buried Colonel Michael Reaper Mitchell so deep that even Emma didn't know he existed. But Vincent Romano had just dug him up. Emma's eyes opened at 6:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I'd been staring at the clock for 14 hours straight, waiting for that moment. When she tried to speak, her voice came out as barely a whisper through the oxygen mask. Mike, the baby. I took her hand, feeling how small and fragile it was compared to mine. These same hands had held assault rifles and defused bombs, but right now they were shaking like a teenager on his first date. Emma, I need you to listen to me, okay? You're going to be fine. You're safe now. But I couldn't tell her about our child. Not yet. Not when she was still hooked up to machines and fighting just to stay conscious. Dr. Harrison said it was better to wait until she was stronger, until the physical trauma had begun to heal. The emotional trauma would last forever. What happened to me? She whispered. Someone attacked you outside Miller's. Do you remember anything? Emma closed her eyes, trying to piece together fragments of memory. I was putting groceries in the car. Someone grabbed me from behind, said something about teaching me a lesson about parking in the wrong spot. Then everything went black. Teaching her a lesson. Vincent Romano had beaten my pregnant wife unconscious because she'd parked in a space he wanted. That was the Romano way. Complete domination, total control, even over something as meaningless as a grocery store parking spot. A knock on the hospital room door interrupted my thoughts. Detective Ray Kowalski entered, holding a small notebook and wearing the kind of expression cops get when they're about to deliver bad news they don't want to deliver. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm glad to see you're awake. I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you a few questions about yesterday's incident. Emma nodded weakly. Kowalski had been on the force for 12 years, and I'd seen him around town enough to know he was generally considered one of the good ones. But even good cops had limits when it came to going up against the Romano family. Can you describe your attacker? Tall, maybe 6'2" or 6'3". Dark hair. Expensive clothes, like a designer jacket. He had a ring on his right hand, something with a big stone that caught the light. I knew that ring. Vincent Romano wore his father's old championship ring from when Tony had been a semi-professional boxer back in the 1980s. It was distinctive, with the Romano family crest engraved on a chunk of black onyx. Emma had just given Kowalski enough information to identify Vincent with absolute certainty. Kowalski scribbled in his notebook, but something about his body language told me he already knew where this was heading. Mrs. Mitchell, were there any witnesses? I think so. Some teenagers came out of the store right after it happened. They might have scared him off. Right. Kowalski closed his notebook. Well, we'll follow up on those leads. In the meantime, you focus on getting better. After Kowalski left, I followed him into the hallway. Detective, what's your read on this case? Kowalski looked around to make sure we were alone, then lowered his voice. Off the record, your wife's description matches someone we know. But proving it, that's a different story. This particular individual has connections, if you know what I mean. I knew exactly what he meant. What kind of connections? The kind where witnesses forget what they saw, security cameras mysteriously malfunction, and evidence has a way of disappearing from lockup. Look, Mr. Mitchell, I've been doing this job long enough to know when a case is going to go nowhere. My advice: be grateful your wife is alive and focus on helping her recover. And if I'm not satisfied with that advice? Kowalski studied my face for a long moment. There was something in his eyes that suggested he sensed more to me than just another construction worker, but he couldn't quite place what it was. Then I'd say you should be very careful about what kind of justice you go looking for in this town. Some people are protected, whether we like it or not. By noon, it was official. Detective Kowalski called to inform me that the case was being classified as an unsolved assault with robbery as the likely motive. The teenagers who'd been witnesses had suddenly developed selective amnesia. The grocery store security cameras had experienced a technical malfunction during the exact time of the attack. Emma's credit cards and cash were still in her purse, but somehow this was still being called a robbery gone wrong. I spent the afternoon making phone calls. First to Emma's principal, letting the school know she'd need extended medical leave. Then to my construction foreman, explaining that I'd need some time off to take care of my wife. Finally, to my mother-in-law in Ohio, because Emma was going to need family support during her recovery. What I didn't tell anyone was that I'd also made another call, to a number I hadn't dialed in 8 years. A number that connected to a man who'd once been my commanding officer and was now something much more useful, a civilian with access to resources that didn't officially exist. "Reaper," came the familiar voice on the other end. "Been a while." "Hello, Colonel Bradley. I need a favor. After what you did in Kabul, you've got a lifetime of favors coming." "What do you need?" "Information on a family called the Romanos, based in western Pennsylvania. Tony Romano is the patriarch, son named Vincent. Give me 48 hours. Anything else?" "Not yet, but there might be." "Understood." "And Reaper? Good to hear your voice again." That evening, I sat next to Emma's hospital bed and watched her sleep. The doctors said she could go home tomorrow, but the physical healing was just the beginning. Dr. Harrison had finally told her about the baby that afternoon. I'd held her while she cried, feeling her tears soak through my shirt and wishing there was something, anything, I could say to make it better. But there wasn't. Words wouldn't bring back our child. Words wouldn't undo the trauma. Words wouldn't make Vincent Romano pay for what he'd done. Emma stirred in her sleep, and I gently brushed a strand of hair away from her face. She looked so peaceful like this, without the weight of grief and loss pressing down on her. For 8 years, I'd worked construction and come home to dinner and movie nights and quiet conversations about our future. I'd been happy being Mike Mitchell, ordinary citizen. But ordinary citizens didn't have the skills to make Vincent Romano answer for his crimes. Ordinary citizens had to accept that sometimes bad people win and justice is just a word in books. I wasn't an ordinary citizen. I was a weapon that had been lying dormant for 8 years, waiting for someone to give me a target worthy of activation. Outside Emma's hospital window, I could see the lights of downtown Millbrook. Somewhere out there, Vincent Romano was probably having drinks and laughing about the pregnant woman he'd beaten unconscious. Somewhere out there, his father Tony was probably congratulating himself on another successful cover-up. They thought this was over. They thought Mike Mitchell would take his broken wife home, grieve quietly, and eventually move on with his life like a good little civilian. They had no idea that Colonel Michael Reaper Mitchell never left a mission unfinished. Emma came home on a Thursday. I'd spent 2 days transforming our house into a recovery center, moving her favorite reading chair closer to the window, stocking the kitchen with her preferred comfort foods, and removing anything that might remind her of the nursery we'd never use. The yellow paint cans were hidden in the garage. The baby clothes were packed away in boxes I couldn't bring myself to throw out. She moved like someone afraid her own body might betray her. Every step was calculated, every movement careful. The doctors said the physical wounds would heal in 6 weeks. The emotional ones might take years. I keep thinking I should remember more, Emma said on her second day home. She was sitting in her chair by the window, staring out at our quiet suburban street. Like maybe if I could remember his face better, or what he said exactly. "Emma, It's not your fault that the police can't do their job. But what if there was something I missed? Some detail that could help them catch him? I wanted to tell her that no detail would matter. That Vincent Romano could confess on live television and still walk free. That the system was designed to protect people like him and grind up people like us. Instead, I made her tea and listened to her blame herself for her attacker's freedom. That night, after Emma had finally fallen asleep with the help of prescription pain medication, I opened my laptop and began the kind of research I hadn't done in 8 years. The internet had changed since my military days, but the principles remained the same. Gather intelligence, identify weaknesses, and develop a comprehensive target profile. The Romano family wasn't subtle about their success. Tony Romano owned Romano Construction, Romano Waste Management, and Romano Security Services. His legitimate businesses were worth an estimated $47 million, according to public records. His illegitimate businesses were probably worth twice that. Vincent Romano had graduated from Penn State with a business degree he'd never used and a criminal record that had been mysteriously sealed when he turned 18. He drove a 2023 Maserati MC20, lived in a penthouse apartment downtown, and was frequently photographed at charity events where his family donated just enough money to buy respectability. But it was the details that weren't in public records that interested me most. For those, I needed to make another call. Colonel Bradley answered on the first ring. Your Romano file is impressive. Tony's been under federal investigation 3 times in the past decade. Nothing ever stuck. What about the son? Vincent's interesting. Arrested for assault 6 times between ages 16 and 25. Charges dropped every time due to witness intimidation or evidence tampering. The FBI has him on their organized crime watch list, but they've never been able to build a case that would survive the Romano family's legal team. Current activities? Runs the family's drug distribution network, primarily cocaine and heroin, with some newer synthetic stuff. Uses his father's legitimate businesses as fronts for money laundering. He's got a crew of about 12 guys who handle enforcement and collections. I was taking notes on a legal pad, falling back into old habits. Intelligence gathering had always been my specialty in Delta Force. While other operators focused on direct action, I'd been the guy who spent weeks studying targets, learning their routines, identifying their vulnerabilities. There's something else, Bradley continued. Vincent's got a temper problem. 3 domestic violence incidents that never made it to court because the women were too scared to testify. Your wife isn't his first victim, Reaper. She's just his most recent. That information hit me like a physical blow. Emma wasn't a random target. She was part of a pattern. Vincent Romano didn't just hurt people when they got in his way. He hurt them because he enjoyed it. I need surveillance equipment, I said. Nothing traceable. That can be arranged. Anything else? Background checks on Romano's crew. Financial records if you can get them. And I need to know their operational schedule. Reaper, what exactly are you planning? Nothing that will create blowback for you or your people. This stays off the books. Understood. 24 hours for the initial package. After hanging up, I walked through our house in the dark, checking locks and security systems the way I'd been trained to clear buildings in hostile territory. Emma was sleeping fitfully upstairs, occasionally making small sounds of distress even in her dreams. For 8 years, I'd convinced myself that Colonel Michael Mitchell was dead, that the man who'd spent 2.5 decades in special operations had been replaced by someone softer, someone who built houses instead of destroying enemies, someone who could be happy with a quiet life and a normal job. But watching Emma struggle to sleep without nightmares, seeing how she flinched every time a car backfired or a door slammed, I realized that the quiet life had been an illusion. Violence had found us anyway. The only choice was whether to be its victim or its master. The next morning, Emma asked me to drive her to the grocery store. I need to go back there, she said. Dr. Martinez says I have to face the place where it happened, or I'll never get past it. Miller's grocery looked the same as always. Busy parking lot, automatic doors, shopping carts scattered around the entrance. But as we sat in my truck, I could see Emma's hands shaking. "I don't think I can do this," she whispered. "You don't have to. We can come back another day." "No, I need to see it. The place where he—" I followed her to the exact spot where I'd found her 3 days earlier. There was no evidence of what had happened, no blood stains, no police tape, no indication that someone's life had been shattered there. Just empty asphalt and a few loose shopping carts. "He was so angry," Emma said suddenly. "That's what I remember most. Not his face, not his voice, but how angry he was. Like I'd personally insulted him just by existing." Vincent Romano had been angry because someone had dared to occupy space he wanted. Emma had been beaten unconscious because she'd committed the crime of parking in a spot that a mob boss's son had decided belonged to him. That level of entitlement, that casual willingness to destroy lives over nothing, it wasn't just criminal. It was cancer. And like any cancer, the only solution was complete removal. "Let's go home," Emma said. "I've seen enough." As we drove back to our house, I made mental notes about Miller's security cameras, traffic patterns, and sight lines. Professional habit. In Delta Force, we'd called it environmental assessment. In civilian life, it was called planning. Emma spent the rest of the day reading on the couch while I worked in the garage, ostensibly organizing tools, but actually thinking through what I'd learned. Vincent Romano was predictable, violent, arrogant, protected by his family's money and connections. He'd been getting away with hurting people for over a decade, confident that his father's influence would always keep him safe. That confidence was going to be his downfall. That evening, I kissed Emma goodnight and waited until she was deeply asleep before slipping out to my truck. It was time to begin the kind of surveillance I hadn't done since Afghanistan. Patient, methodical, invisible. Vincent Romano's penthouse was in the Heritage Tower, downtown Millbrook's most expensive residential building. 23 floors, doorman, valet parking, the kind of place where money bought privacy and privacy bought impunity. But every fortress had weaknesses. Every target had routines. Every enemy had blind spots. I parked across the street and began to watch and wait. Vincent Romano left his penthouse every morning at 9:15 a.m. He drove his Maserati to Romano Construction Headquarters, spent exactly 2 hours in meetings he probably didn't understand, then headed to lunch at Marcello's restaurant, a high-end Italian place his family owned downtown. Afternoons were for business meetings at various locations around the city, which really meant collecting money from drug dealers and intimidating shop owners who were behind on protection payments. I'd been watching him for 6 days, documenting everything in a composition notebook like the ones Emma used for her lesson plans. Times, locations, associates, patterns. The kind of detailed surveillance that had kept me alive through 3 combat tours and dozens of classified operations. Emma was getting stronger. She'd started taking short walks around the neighborhood and had even returned to reading her favorite mystery novels. But she still flinched when strangers approached, and she hadn't slept through the night since coming home from the hospital. "Mike, you've been working late a lot this week," she said over breakfast on Monday morning. "Is everything okay with the Henderson project?" I was buttering toast and trying to look like a man whose biggest concern was pouring concrete foundations instead of someone who'd spent the weekend photographing a drug dealer's daily routine. "Just some scheduling issues. Should be back to normal hours soon. I worry about you pushing yourself too hard. You've been taking care of me, working extra hours. When do you get to rest?" Never, I thought. Not until Vincent Romano pays for what he did to us. Not until justice gets served the way it should have been served a week ago. "I'm fine, Emma. Really. But I wasn't fine. I was operating on 4 hours of sleep and a level of focused anger I hadn't felt since my last deployment. The difference was that in Afghanistan, I'd had a team of operators watching my back. Here, I was working alone, which meant I needed backup of a different kind. That afternoon, I made the first of several phone calls that would change everything. "Jackson here." "Jackson, it's Reaper." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. Mike Mitchell. Heard you'd gone civilian." I had. Circumstances changed. Staff Sergeant Derek Jackson had been my communications specialist for 4 years. After leaving the military, he joined the DEA and was now a senior field agent based in Pittsburgh, less than 2 hours from Millbrook. What kind of circumstances are we talking about? The kind where organized crime beat my pregnant wife unconscious and the local police are pretending it never happened. Another pause, longer this time. Jesus, Mike. I'm sorry. What do you need? Intelligence, operational support, and eventually, coordination with federal law enforcement. You know I can't authorize anything official without going through proper channels. I'm not asking for anything official yet. Just information from someone I trust. Jackson was quiet for a moment, probably weighing his career against loyalty to an old teammate. Send me what you have. Encrypted email, same protocols we used in Kandahar. I'll see what I can do. My second call was to Tommy Chun, who'd been our demolitions expert and was now an IRS criminal investigator in Philadelphia. Tommy had always been the best at following money trails, finding the financial connections that brought down criminal organizations when bullets and raids couldn't. Reaper, man, it's been forever. How's married life treating you? It's complicated, Tommy. I need help with a tax evasion case. Official or unofficial? Unofficial for now. Family called Romano, based in western Pennsylvania. They've been laundering money through legitimate businesses for years. Romano. Why does that name sound familiar? I could hear Tommy typing in the background. Oh, right. We've had our eye on them for about 18 months. Multiple red flags, but never enough evidence for a full investigation. What would it take to get that evidence? Inside access to their financial records, bank statements, business ledgers, cash flow documentation. The kind of stuff that requires either a warrant or someone on the inside. What if someone could get you that documentation? Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Hypothetically speaking, if documentation fell into my lap from an anonymous source, and if that documentation revealed clear evidence of tax evasion and money laundering, I'd be obligated to pursue a full investigation. Hypothetically speaking, how long would that investigation take? 6 to 8 months for a full case. But once we start seizing assets and freezing accounts, these organizations usually fall apart pretty quickly. My third call was to Marcus Webb, our former sniper who'd become an FBI agent specializing in organized crime. Marcus had always been the most patient member of our team, willing to wait hours for the perfect shot. Now he waited months or years to build cases against criminal enterprises. Reaper, you son of a bitch. Please tell me you're calling with good news. Afraid not, Marcus. I need help taking down a crime family. Official help or the other kind. Eventually official. Right now, I just need someone who understands how these organizations work. I spent 20 minutes briefing Marcus on the Romano family structure, their legitimate businesses, and their criminal activities. He listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification on specific details. This Vincent character sounds like the weak link, Marcus said finally. Violent, unpredictable, probably resented by the older generation for being reckless. If you could create enough pressure on him specifically, he might do something stupid that gives us grounds for federal intervention. What kind of pressure? Operational disruption. Make his drug business unreliable, his protection rackets ineffective, his father question his competence. Guys like Vincent usually respond to pressure by escalating, and escalation creates evidence. That evening, Emma was in the living room watching a cooking show when I came home from my construction work. She looked better than she had in days, more color in her cheeks, less tension in her shoulders. How was your day? She asked, patting the couch cushion next to her. Productive. How was yours? I called Dr. Martinez. She thinks I'm ready to start thinking about going back to work. Maybe just part-time at first, but that's great news, Em. Really great. And it was great news. Emma returning to work meant she was healing, regaining confidence, taking back control of her life. But it also meant I'd have more freedom to conduct the kind of operations that required complete secrecy. Mike, can I ask you something? Of course. You seem different since the attack. More focused, but also more distant. Are you sure you're okay? I looked at my wife, this woman I'd been protecting with lies for 8 years. She deserved to know who she'd married. She deserved to understand that the man sitting next to her wasn't just a construction worker with calloused hands and a steady paycheck. But she also deserved to sleep at night without worrying that her husband was planning to systematically destroy the most dangerous criminal organization in 3 counties. I'm processing everything that happened, I said finally. It's going to take time. I know. I don't want this to change us, you know? Vincent Romano took our baby. I won't let him take our marriage too. Vincent Romano. She'd said his name with surprising strength, like she was reclaiming power over it. Emma might not remember her attacker's face clearly, but she'd learned his identity from the news reports about the ongoing investigation. He won't take anything else from us, I said. I promise you that. How can you promise that? The police said. Emma, some promises don't depend on the police. She studied my face for a long moment, searching for something she couldn't quite identify. Sometimes I feel like there's more to you than I know, like you're keeping something important from me. Everyone keeps some things private, not marriage-ending things, not life-changing things. I pulled her closer, feeling how perfectly she fit against my shoulder. For 8 years, I'd been content to be her quiet, dependable husband. The man who fixed leaky faucets and remembered anniversaries and never talked about the war. But Vincent Romano had dragged Colonel Michael Mitchell back from the dead, and there was no putting that ghost to rest until justice was served. I love you, Emma. Everything I do, everything I've ever done, is to protect what we have. I love you too. That's why I need you to talk to me if something's wrong. Nothing's wrong, I lied. Everything's going to be fine. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, I sat in the garage reviewing my notes and planning the next phase of operations. Jackson had already sent encrypted files on Romano drug distribution networks. Tommy was developing a strategy for accessing Romano financial records. Marcus was identifying federal statutes that could be applied once we had sufficient evidence. For the first time since finding Emma bleeding in a hospital bed, I felt something other than helpless rage. I felt the cold, methodical satisfaction that came with having a plan. Vincent Romano thought he was untouchable. His father thought their money and connections made them immune to consequences. They were about to learn the difference between local justice and Delta Force justice. Romano Construction needed skilled workers for their new downtown project, a 12-story office building that would house several of Tony Romano's legitimate businesses. The job posting had been online for 3 weeks, which told me they were either very picky about who they hired or having trouble finding people willing to work for a company with the Romano name attached to it. I submitted my application on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I was sitting across from a hiring manager named Danny Torino, a thick-set man in his 50s who looked like he'd spent more time breaking kneecaps than reading resumes. You got good references, Torino said, flipping through my paperwork. 8 years with Henderson Construction, clean background check, all your certifications up to date. I do good work. That's what we need. Reliable guys who show up on time and keep their mouths shut about company business. I'm not much of a talker. Torino studied my face for a moment, probably trying to determine if I was the type of employee who might ask uncomfortable questions about why construction projects required armed security guards or why certain areas of job sites were always off-limits to workers. You start Monday, 7 a.m. sharp. Report to Foreman Luis Martinez at the downtown site. Thank you, sir. That was it. After 2 weeks of surveillance and planning, I was inside the Romano organization. Not deep inside. Construction workers were disposable labor, not trusted associates, but close enough to begin gathering the kind of intelligence that could bring down an empire. I drove home feeling something I hadn't experienced since leaving the military. The anticipation of a mission beginning. Emma was in the kitchen making dinner when I arrived. She'd started cooking again, which her therapist said was a positive sign of returning to normal routines. How did the job interview go? Got it. Start Monday. That's wonderful. Where is it? Downtown construction project. 12-story office building. Emma smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her in weeks. Maybe things are finally getting back to normal. Normal. I nodded and kissed her forehead, not mentioning that normal was the last thing I wanted. Normal meant Vincent Romano walking free while Emma had nightmares. Normal meant accepting that some people were above the law. I wanted justice, not normal. Monday morning came with October rain and a gray sky that matched my mood. The Romano construction site was impressive, prime real estate worth millions, state-of-the-art equipment, and enough security to protect a military installation. I counted 4 guards during my first walkthrough, all carrying concealed weapons and wearing earpieces. Luis Martinez was everything Torino wasn't: professional, competent, and more interested in building quality structures than intimidating workers. You're Mitchell, right? Henderson spoke highly of your work. I appreciate the opportunity. We run a tight operation here. Good work gets rewarded, problems get eliminated quickly. You understand? Yes, sir. Martinez assigned me to the concrete crew, which meant I'd be working on foundation and structural elements throughout the building. More importantly, it meant I'd have access to areas where Romano family members conducted business meetings, stored sensitive documents, and discussed operations they thought were private. The first 3 days were routine construction work, mixing concrete, setting rebar, operating machinery. But I was also mapping the building's layout, identifying security vulnerabilities, and listening to conversations that revealed more than the speakers realized. Vincent Romano visited the site every Tuesday and Friday, usually accompanied by 2 bodyguards and carrying a leather briefcase that never left his sight. He'd disappear into a temporary office trailer for 30 to 40 minutes, emerge looking either satisfied or angry, then drive off in his Maserati. What happens in those meetings? I asked Carlos, a veteran worker who'd been with Romano Construction for 6 years. None of our business, Carlos replied quickly. Vincent handles the money side. We handle the building side. Smart workers keep those things separate. But Carlos's nervousness told me everything I needed to know. The trailer wasn't just a construction office. It was a money laundering operation. Vincent was probably using the building project to clean drug profits, converting cash into legitimate construction expenses and inflated material costs. On my second Tuesday, I volunteered for overtime work that would keep me on site after normal hours. Most workers went home at 4 p.m., leaving only security guards and a skeleton crew for evening operations. That's when I saw the real Romano business. Around 6 p.m., 3 expensive cars arrived. Not construction vehicles, luxury sedans with tinted windows and license plates that suggested government connections. Vincent emerged from his trailer to greet the visitors, all middle-aged men in suits who looked more like politicians than contractors. They talked for 2 hours. I couldn't hear specific words from my position near the concrete mixing station, but their body language told a story of negotiation, disagreement, and eventual compromise. Money changed hands, briefcases full of cash that disappeared into the trailer. By Thursday, I'd identified the pattern. Vincent used the construction site as a meeting place for city officials who were on his family's payroll. Building permits, zoning variances, inspection approvals, all purchased with cash that got laundered through inflated construction budgets. It was elegant, efficient, and completely illegal. That evening, I encrypted my observations and sent them to Tommy Chun at the IRS. Financial crimes were his specialty, and what I'd witnessed was textbook money laundering combined with government corruption. Tommy's response came within hours. This is exactly what we need. Can you get documentation? Documentation meant accessing Vincent's trailer, photographing records, and copying financial information without getting caught. In Afghanistan, we'd called this intelligence gathering behind enemy lines. In civilian life, it was called breaking and entering. The difference was that in Afghanistan, getting caught meant a firefight. Here, getting caught meant Emma would lose her husband to a prison sentence or a shallow grave. But Vincent Romano had made it personal when he beat my pregnant wife unconscious. Personal meant the rules changed. Friday night, I told Emma I was working late to finish a concrete pour that couldn't wait until Monday. She kissed me goodbye and reminded me to be careful, having no idea that her husband was about to commit his first felony in 8 years. The construction site was quiet by 8 p.m. 2 security guards patrolled the perimeter, but their routes were predictable and their attention was focused on preventing thieves from stealing equipment, not on watching for someone who was supposed to be there. Vincent's trailer was locked with a standard deadbolt and a basic alarm system, adequate security for deterring curious workers, but laughably insufficient for someone with my training. I had the door open in under 3 minutes without triggering any alarms. Inside, the trailer was divided between a legitimate construction office and something that looked more like an accounting firm specializing in creative bookkeeping. File cabinets full of financial records, computer systems with encrypted hard drives, and a wall safe that probably contained enough cash to buy a small town. I had 40 minutes before the security guards completed their next patrol circuit. 40 minutes to photograph everything that could destroy the Romano Empire. I started with the financial records. The Romano financial records were a gold mine of evidence. Bank statements showing cash deposits that didn't match construction expenses. Invoices for materials that were never delivered. Payroll records for employees who didn't exist. Vincent had been sloppy with his money laundering, probably because he'd never imagined anyone would be smart enough to access his private files. He was wrong about that. I spent 38 minutes photographing documents with a high-resolution camera Tommy had provided. Contracts with city officials, bribe payment schedules, drug distribution profit margins. Everything the federal government would need to dismantle the Romano organization piece by piece. But I also found something else. Something that made my blood run cold. A manila folder labeled insurance claims contained photographs of Emma lying unconscious in the hospital parking lot. Not police photos. These were taken by someone else, someone who'd been watching while Vincent beat my wife senseless. The images were date-stamped and organized like evidence. But evidence for what purpose? The answer was in a handwritten note clipped to the photos. Potential witness elimination if investigation continues. Vincent Romano hadn't just attacked Emma randomly. He'd documented the assault and was prepared to kill her if the police investigation got too close to the truth. My wife wasn't just a victim. She was a marked target. I photographed everything, including the surveillance photos, then carefully returned all documents to their original positions. The security guards would never know their perimeter had been breached. Driving home, I had to pull over twice because my hands were shaking with rage. The clinical detachment I'd maintained for weeks was cracking. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This was about survival. Emma was asleep when I got home, but she stirred when I slipped into bed beside her. How did the concrete pour go? Fine. Got everything finished. She curled against me in the darkness, trusting and vulnerable. Vincent Romano had photographed her at her most helpless moment and filed those images like trophies. He was planning to kill her if necessary to protect his criminal empire. That changed everything. The next morning, I sent encrypted files to all 3 of my federal contacts. Jackson at the DEA, Tommy at the IRS, and Marcus at the FBI each received comprehensive evidence packages that could support multiple criminal investigations. But federal investigations took months or years to develop. Emma didn't have that kind of time if Vincent decided she was becoming a liability. I needed to accelerate the timeline. Phase 1 began on Monday with anonymous tips to Vincent's competitors. The Romano drug operation relied on exclusive territory agreements. Other dealers stayed out of Romano neighborhoods, and the Romanos respected similar boundaries elsewhere in the city. But what happened when someone started selling drugs in Romano territory without permission? I made 3 phone calls to rival organizations, each claiming to be a Romano insider willing to sell territorial information for cash. Within 48 hours, Dealers from Pittsburgh and Philadelphia were setting up operations in Vincent's most profitable neighborhoods. The response was swift and violent. Vincent's crew spent the next week chasing down intruders, shutting down competing dealers, and trying to figure out who had leaked their territorial boundaries. Resources that should have been focused on profit generation were diverted to territorial defense. Phase 2 targeted Romano Construction's legitimate businesses. Building permits that had been approved through bribery suddenly faced routine inspections from city officials who hadn't been paid to look the other way. I'd identified which inspectors were clean and fed them anonymous tips about code violations at Romano job sites. Within 10 days, 3 Romano construction projects were shut down for safety violations, zoning compliance issues, and permit irregularities. The family was bleeding money on multiple fronts while struggling to understand why their usually reliable corruption network was failing. Phase 3 was personal. Vincent Romano ate lunch at Marcello's restaurant every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Always the same table, always the same time, always surrounded by the same 2 bodyguards who were more concerned with looking intimidating than actually providing security. I spent a week studying their routine, identifying vulnerabilities, planning an operation that would send a message without creating evidence that could be traced back to me. The message was simple. Vincent Romano was not untouchable. Saturday afternoon, I followed Vincent's Maserati from his penthouse to Marcello's. He parked in his usual spot, a handicapped space he used because he knew nobody would challenge him. The bodyguards positioned themselves at the restaurant's entrance while Vincent enjoyed his meal inside. 20 minutes later, Vincent emerged to find his $300,000 sports car sitting on 4 flat tires. Not slashed, that would have been vandalism. Deflated using a tool that left no evidence of tampering. The kind of thing that could happen to anyone, anywhere, anytime. But Vincent knew better. He screamed at his bodyguards, threatened bystanders, and demanded restaurant security footage that conveniently showed nothing useful. For the first time in his life, Vincent Romano had been touched by someone he couldn't identify, couldn't intimidate, and couldn't eliminate. The psychological impact was exactly what I'd intended. Vincent started varying his routines, adding security measures, and looking over his shoulder constantly. Paranoia was setting in. Emma noticed my improved mood that evening. "You seem more like yourself lately," she said over dinner. "Less stressed about work. Things are settling into a good rhythm. I'm glad. I was worried you were pushing yourself too hard trying to take care of me and work extra hours." If only she knew that taking care of her was exactly what I'd been doing, just not in the way she imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Webb, Romano organization showing signs of internal pressure. Vincent Romano has requested FBI protection, claiming harassment from unknown subjects. Ironic, considering Vincent was scared enough to ask federal law enforcement for help. The same agencies his family had been bribing and evading for decades were now his only hope for protection against an enemy he couldn't see. But the best part was yet to come. Tommy Chin called that evening with an update that made everything worthwhile. IRS is opening formal investigation into Romano Construction financial irregularities. Asset seizure warrants should be ready within 30 days. 30 days. In 1 month, the Romano family's legitimate businesses would be frozen, their bank accounts seized, and their money laundering operation shut down. Vincent would go from untouchable crime prince to federal defendant facing 25 years in prison. But I wasn't finished. The financial destruction was just the beginning. Vincent Romano had beaten my pregnant wife unconscious and planned to kill her if necessary. Justice required more than prison time. Justice required him to understand exactly what he'd lost and who had taken it from him. The federal raids began at dawn on a Tuesday. I was drinking coffee in my kitchen when Emma turned on the morning news, and we both watched Romano Construction headquarters being surrounded by FBI agents, IRS investigators, and DEA task force members. Breaking news this morning, the reporter announced, Federal agents are executing search warrants at multiple locations connected to the Romano crime family. Sources tell us this investigation has been ongoing for several months. Emma looked shocked. That's the construction company you almost applied to work for, isn't it? Yeah, dodged a bullet there. What she didn't know was that I was still working for Romano Construction, still showing up every day to help build Vincent's downtown office tower while his empire crumbled around him. The irony was perfect. Vincent's own construction worker was feeding intelligence to the federal agents who were destroying his family. By noon, the scope of the raids was clear. Romano Construction, Romano Waste Management, Romano Security Services, all shut down pending investigation. Bank accounts frozen, business licenses suspended, assets seized. 23 arrests, including several city officials who'd been taking Romano bribes for years. Vincent Romano wasn't among those arrested, but only because he'd fled the city the moment the first warrant was executed. Marcus Webb called that afternoon with an update. Your boy Vincent is in the wind. Left town in a private jet around 6 a.m. We're tracking him, but he's got resources and connections. What about Tony Romano? In federal custody, charged with racketeering, money laundering, tax evasion, and conspiracy. He's looking at life without parole if we can make everything stick. Will it stick? With the evidence you provided? Absolutely. The financial records alone are enough to convict him 10 times over. I felt satisfaction, but not completion. Tony Romano going to prison was justice for decades of criminal activity, but it wasn't personal justice for what Vincent had done to Emma. Vincent was still free, still dangerous, still capable of carrying out his plan to eliminate potential witnesses. That evening, Emma and I watched more news coverage of the Romano family's downfall. Reporters were calling it the biggest organized crime bust in Pennsylvania history. Federal officials were promising that this was just the beginning of a larger investigation into corruption in state and local government. I keep thinking about that poor woman Vincent Romano attacked, Emma said during a commercial break. The one from the grocery store parking lot. She probably feels safer knowing he can't hurt anyone else. Emma still didn't know she was talking about herself. The police had never identified her as Vincent's victim in any public statements, protecting her privacy while the investigation was supposedly ongoing. Now there would never be an official investigation. Vincent Romano was a federal fugitive wanted on charges that carried longer sentences than assault. But I knew Vincent wouldn't stay hidden forever. Men like him couldn't resist the temptation to reclaim what they'd lost. His pride, his need for control, his absolute inability to accept defeat. Those character flaws would bring him back to Millbrook eventually. When they did, I'd be ready. Jackson called 3 days later with intelligence that confirmed my prediction. Vincent's been spotted in Miami, trying to rebuild his drug distribution network. Word is he's planning something big. Either a permanent relocation or a return to Pennsylvania to salvage what's left of the family business. Timeline. Hard to say. Could be weeks, could be months. But our sources suggest he's not the type to stay in exile permanently. Keep me informed. Will do. By the way, the DEA is very interested in meeting the anonymous source who provided all that intelligence. There might be a substantial reward involved. Not interested in rewards. Just results. Jackson understood. This wasn't about money or recognition. This was about Emma sleeping through the night without nightmares. This was about justice that the system couldn't or wouldn't provide through normal channels. 2 weeks after the raids, Emma returned to work part-time. Her first day back at the elementary school was emotional. Her students had made welcome back cards. Her fellow teachers had organized a small celebration, and the principal had rearranged her schedule to reduce stress during the transition period. How did it feel? I asked when she came home that afternoon. Good. Really good. Like I'm reclaiming pieces of my life that I thought were gone forever. I'm proud of you, Em. I know it wasn't easy. The hardest part was walking through the parking lot. For a second, I thought I saw him, Vincent Romano. But then I realized I was just being paranoid. He's probably in prison with his father by now. I didn't correct her assumption. Emma's healing process was fragile enough without knowing that her attacker was still free, still dangerous, and still potentially planning her elimination. That night, I updated my surveillance notes and reviewed intelligence reports from my federal contacts. Vincent Romano's Miami operation was struggling. His father's arrest had severed most of the Romano family's established connections, forcing Vincent to work with unreliable partners who didn't trust him and criminal organizations that saw him as a liability rather than an asset. Financial pressure was mounting. Legal fees for his father's defense were draining what remained of the family's liquid assets. The IRS had seized properties worth over $40 million, leaving Vincent with limited resources to rebuild his empire. Most importantly, Vincent's crew was falling apart. 12 experienced criminals who'd worked for the Romano family for years were either under arrest, cooperating with federal investigators, or distancing themselves from an organization that had become radioactive. Vincent Romano was isolated, desperate, and running out of options. Men in that situation made predictable choices. They either disappeared forever or returned home to make a final stand. Given Vincent's personality profile, disappearing wasn't an option. His ego wouldn't allow it. His need for respect and control wouldn't permit permanent exile. He would come back to Millbrook, and when he did, he would come back angry. Marcus Webb confirmed my analysis during our next conversation. Psychological profile suggests Vincent Romano is incapable of accepting permanent defeat. He'll return to Pennsylvania within the next 60 days, probably with a small team of hired professionals and a plan to eliminate witnesses who could testify against him. What kind of witnesses? Anyone who could connect him to specific crimes. Family members who might cooperate with prosecutors, business associates who could provide testimony, victims who could identify him in court. Victims like Emma. I'd been preparing for Vincent's return since the day the federal raids began. Equipment had been purchased through untraceable channels. Safe houses had been identified. Emergency protocols had been established. Emma thought we were finally moving past the trauma of her attack. She didn't know that the most dangerous phase was just beginning. Vincent Romano was coming home, and when he arrived, he would discover that the construction worker whose wife he'd beaten was actually a Delta Force operator who'd spent 3 months systematically destroying everything Vincent had ever valued. The final confrontation was inevitable. The only question was whether Emma would survive it. Vincent Romano returned to Millbrook on a Thursday night in November. He didn't announce his arrival with fanfare or dramatic gestures. He simply appeared, like a disease returning to infect a healing body. Marcus Webb called me at 11:47 p.m. with the intelligence I'd been expecting for weeks. He's back. Landed at a private airfield outside the city 2 hours ago. Traveling with 3 professionals. Mercenaries, not local muscle. This isn't about rebuilding his operation. This is about eliminating loose ends before he disappears permanently. How much time do I have? Hard to say. Could be hours, could be days. But Mike, he's not coming back to make deals or negotiate. He's coming back to kill people. I knew exactly which people Vincent planned to kill. Emma was at the top of that list, followed by anyone else who could testify about Romano family crimes. Vincent's plan was simple: eliminate witnesses, then vanish into whatever new identity his remaining money could buy. It was a good plan. It might have worked against ordinary civilians who trusted the system to protect them. But Vincent Romano had made one critical miscalculation. He'd attacked the wife of a man who'd spent 25 years perfecting the art of making enemies disappear. Emma was sleeping peacefully when I hung up the phone. Her nightmares had been less frequent lately, and she'd started talking about maybe trying to have another baby in the spring. Recovery was a slow process, but she was getting stronger every day. I couldn't let Vincent Romano steal that progress from her. I spent the next hour making preparations that I hoped Emma would never have to know about. Emergency bag packed with cash, weapons, and false identification documents. Secure communication devices charged and ready. Exit strategies mapped and memorized. If Vincent wanted to play elimination games, I was prepared to show him how a professional operator conducted that kind of business. Friday morning came with gray November clouds and the kind of cold rain that made everything look abandoned. Emma left for school at her usual time, kissing me goodbye and reminding me to pick up groceries on my way home from work. "I love you," she said, lingering in the doorway like she sometimes did when anxiety was creeping back into her thoughts. "I love you too. Everything's going to be fine. Promise. I promise." It was a promise I intended to keep, regardless of what it cost me personally. At the Romano construction site, the atmosphere was different. Tense. Workers kept glancing over their shoulders, and even Luis Martinez seemed distracted. Vincent's return had been noticed by people who understood what his presence meant for anyone connected to the Romano organization. "You hear Vincent's back in town?" Carlos asked during our lunch break. "I heard rumors." "Man, I hope the feds get him quick. Guy like that, on the run with nothing left to lose, that's dangerous for everybody." Carlos was right, but he didn't understand just how dangerous. Vincent Romano wasn't just another criminal facing federal charges. He was a predator who'd been cornered, and cornered predators were willing to do anything to survive. Around 2 p.m., I received a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Mike Mitchell. We need to talk. Heritage Tower penthouse. Come alone. You have 1 hour." Vincent had found me. Somehow, despite all my operational security and careful planning, he'd identified me as a threat. The text could only mean one thing. He knew who I really was. I had a choice. I could run, take Emma, and disappear into the kind of deep cover that would keep us safe, but require abandoning everything we'd built together. Or I could finish what Vincent had started when he beat my wife unconscious in a grocery store parking lot. The choice wasn't difficult. Heritage Tower looked the same as it had during my surveillance weeks. Expensive, secure, and designed to make visitors feel intimidated by wealth and power. But as I rode the elevator to the penthouse floor, I wasn't thinking about intimidation. I was thinking about tactics. Vincent answered his door personally, which told me he was either very confident or very desperate. Probably both. "Mike Mitchell," he said, gesturing for me to enter. "Or should I call you Colonel Michael Mitchell? Delta Force, 25 years of service, 3 combat deployments, decorated for valor in Afghanistan." Vincent Romano. "How did you figure it out?" "Took a while. But when someone systematically destroys your entire life, you start asking questions about everyone who's been close enough to gather the kind of intelligence that brought down my family." Vincent's penthouse was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows, and enough ostentatious displays of wealth to impress people who confused money with power. 3 men in expensive suits stood near the windows, professional killers who were probably being paid very well to ensure this conversation ended with my death. "You want to know the funny thing?" Vincent continued. "I didn't even remember your wife until after the federal raid started. Just another random woman who got in my way, you know? But then I started putting pieces together, and I realized I'd made a very expensive mistake." "Expensive how?" $47 million in seized assets. My father facing life in prison. 30 years of family business destroyed. All because I lost my temper with some pregnant kindergarten teacher in a grocery store parking lot. Vincent poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, his hands remarkably steady for someone whose entire world had collapsed. The ironic part is that if you'd just been a normal husband, none of this would have happened. You would have grieved your dead baby, maybe moved to another town, and eventually moved on with your life. But you're not a normal husband, are you, Colonel? "No, I'm not." So here we are. The construction worker who's actually a special operations legend, and the crime boss's son who picked the wrong woman to beat unconscious. It's almost poetic. Vincent walked to his window, looking out over downtown Millbrook like a king surveying his former kingdom. "The question now is what happens next. I could have my associates kill you right here, but that doesn't solve my larger problem. Your wife is still alive, still capable of identifying me if federal prosecutors decide to pursue assault charges. Leave him out of this. I'm afraid that's not possible. You see, I've lost everything else. My money, my organization, my family's legacy. The only way I salvage any kind of future is by eliminating every witness who could connect me to past crimes. That includes your wife. Vincent turned back to face me, and I saw something in his eyes that confirmed what I'd suspected since receiving his text message. This wasn't just about eliminating witnesses. This was about revenge. Vincent Romeo wanted me to watch Emma die before he killed me. Payment for the humiliation of losing everything to a construction worker. You made one mistake, I said quietly. What's that? You told me your plan instead of just executing it. Vincent smiled, probably thinking I was about to make some desperate plea for Emma's life. Instead, I was calculating distances, analyzing angles, and preparing to demonstrate why Delta Force operators were trained to survive situations that killed ordinary people. The three professionals by the window were good, but they weren't expecting their target to be better. Vincent Romano was about to learn the difference between hiring killers and facing one. The first gunshot shattered Vincent's penthouse window. The second and third dropped his hired professionals before they could draw their weapons. 25 years of combat training compressed into 4 seconds of lethal precision. Vincent dove behind his marble kitchen counter, screaming into his phone for backup that would never arrive. His security team was already neutralized. Marcus Webb's FBI tactical unit had been positioned around Heritage Tower since midnight, waiting for my signal. Vincent, I called out, moving through his penthouse with the methodical efficiency that had kept me alive through 3 combat deployments. It's over. Your hired guns are dead. Your building is surrounded, and federal agents are on their way up. You son of a bitch. Vincent's voice cracked with panic and rage. You destroyed everything. My family, my business, my life. You destroyed your own life when you beat my pregnant wife unconscious. I found Vincent cowering behind his kitchen island, clutching a pistol he clearly didn't know how to use properly. His hands were shaking so badly, he couldn't maintain proper grip or sight alignment. Stand up, Vincent. Go to hell. Stand up, or I'll drag you up. Vincent slowly rose to his feet, keeping the gun pointed in my general direction. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and his face showed the kind of desperate fear that came with realizing death was inevitable. You want to know something funny? Vincent said, trying to steady his voice. I never even got your wife's name. She was just nobody. Random woman in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her name is Emma Mitchell. She teaches kindergarten. She loves reading mystery novels and makes the best chocolate chip cookies in Pennsylvania. She wanted to name our baby Grace if it was a girl, Michael if it was a boy. Your baby. Vincent's face went pale as the full impact of his crimes finally registered. I didn't know she was pregnant when I... Yes, you did. Her condition was obvious. You beat a pregnant woman unconscious because she parked in a space you wanted. Then you planned to kill her if the police investigation got too close. That was business. Nothing personal. Everything is personal when you attack someone's family. The sound of boots in the stairwell indicated that Marcus Webb's team was almost in position. Vincent heard them too, and desperation made him reckless. I can make you rich, he said quickly. Offshore accounts, cash reserves, diamonds. $50 million if you let me walk out of here. I don't want your money, Vincent. Then what do you want? Justice. The penthouse door exploded inward as FBI tactical agents flooded the apartment. Vincent spun toward the noise, and I used his momentary distraction to disarm him with a technique that left his wrist broken and his pistol skittering across marble flooring. Vincent Romano, Marcus Webb announced, you're under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, assault with intent to commit murder, and conspiracy to commit witness intimidation. As federal agents secured the scene and began processing evidence, Marcus pulled me aside. Nice work, Reaper. Clean takedown, no civilian casualties, and we got everything on recording for trial purposes. What happens now? Vincent gets processed, his father gets life without parole, and the Romano crime family becomes history. Your wife gets justice, and you get to go home to her. Justice. After 3 months of planning, surveillance, and careful execution, Vincent Romano was finally going to face consequences for his crimes. Not just the assault on Emma, but decades of violence, corruption, and criminal enterprise that had terrorized Western Pennsylvania. There's one more thing, Marcus said. The federal prosecutor wants to discuss a plea agreement with Vincent. He's got information about other crime families, political corruption, judicial bribery. If he cooperates fully, he might avoid the death penalty. And if he doesn't cooperate, multiple life sentences in a maximum security federal prison. Either way, he'll never hurt another innocent person. That evening, I drove home through familiar streets that somehow looked different. Cleaner. Safer. The Romano crime family's influence had been eliminated, their corrupt network dismantled, their reign of terror ended permanently. Emma was waiting in our living room, watching the evening news coverage of Vincent Romano's arrest. Federal investigators were calling it the successful conclusion of the largest organized crime takedown in state history. Can you believe this? Emma said as I sat down next to her. They finally caught the man who attacked me. Vincent Romano is going to prison for the rest of his life. How does that make you feel? Safe. For the first time since the attack, I actually feel safe. Emma curled against my side, and I felt some of the tension I'd been carrying for months finally begin to release. Vincent Romano would never threaten my wife again. The Romano crime family would never terrorize another family the way they terrorized ours. Mike, can I tell you something? Of course. I know you've been keeping secrets from me. About your past, about who you really are. I don't know the details, but I know you're not just a construction worker. My heart stopped. Emma, I don't need to know everything. But I need you to know that whatever you did to make sure Vincent Romano could never hurt me again. Thank you. I looked into my wife's eyes and saw understanding, acceptance, and love that transcended whatever secrets I'd kept to protect her. I love you, Emma. Everything I did was to keep you safe. I know, and I love you too, whoever you really are. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, I stepped out onto our back porch and looked up at stars that seemed brighter than they had in months. My phone buzzed with a final text from Marcus Webb. Vincent Romano formally charged with 17 federal crimes. Prosecution estimates 300+ years in prison if convicted on all counts. Mission accomplished, Colonel. Mission accomplished. For the first time since finding Emma bleeding in a hospital parking lot, I felt the kind of peace that came with knowing justice had been served. Vincent Romano had learned the hard way that some people couldn't be intimidated, some crimes couldn't be covered up, and some husbands would do whatever it took to protect their wives. The war was over. Emma was safe, and Mike Mitchell could finally be just a construction worker again. 6 months later, Emma stood in our new kitchen in North Carolina, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her growing belly. We'd moved south after Vincent Romano's trial concluded with guilty verdicts on all 17 federal charges. 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Justice served in the most complete way possible. The baby's kicking, Emma said, smiling as she felt our child move inside her. Strong kicks, just like his father. How do you know it's a boy? Mother's intuition. Plus, he's already showing signs of being stubborn and overprotective. We'd learned we were expecting again just 2 months after Vincent's arrest. Emma's doctor said the timing was actually beneficial. Having something positive to focus on helped accelerate her emotional recovery from the trauma. The nightmares had stopped completely by her 2nd trimester. Dr. Patterson says everything looks perfect at this stage, Emma continued. No complications, healthy development, due date still on track for early summer. That's wonderful news. Our new home was everything Emma had dreamed of, 3 bedrooms, large backyard, quiet neighborhood where children played safely in tree-lined streets. I'd found work with a local construction company whose owner was a Marine veteran who understood that some employees preferred not to discuss their military backgrounds in detail. The Romano family had become history. Tony Romano died in federal prison 3 months after sentencing, officially from a heart attack, though Marcus Webb suggested that organized crime leaders rarely died of natural causes in maximum security facilities. Vincent was serving his sentences at ADX Florence in Colorado, the same supermax prison that housed terrorists and serial killers. Mike, do you ever regret leaving Pennsylvania? Never. This is where we belong now. Emma turned from the window where she'd been watching neighborhood children ride bicycles and play basketball in driveways. I keep thinking about that woman Vincent attacked at Miller's Grocery. I wonder if she knows he can never hurt anyone again. Emma still didn't know she was talking about herself. Dr. Martinez had recommended against revealing that detail unless her recovery stalled, which thankfully never happened. Sometimes healing required leaving certain truths buried. I'm sure she feels safer knowing justice was served. I hope so. I hope she's found peace. Peace. That word perfectly described what Emma had achieved through months of therapy, medication, and the simple passage of time. She'd returned to teaching full-time, started volunteering at a crisis counseling center, and begun planning our child's nursery with the enthusiasm she'd lost after the attack. My phone rang, Marcus Webb calling with his monthly update on federal cases connected to the Romano investigation. Good news, Reaper. The corruption trials are wrapping up. 12 city officials convicted, 8 police officers facing federal charges, and enough evidence recovered to support prosecutions for the next 5 years. Any loose ends? None that threaten you or Emma. The Romano organization is completely dismantled. Vincent's remaining associates either cooperated with prosecutors or disappeared into witness protection programs. What about Vincent himself? Solitary confinement, 23 hours per day. No visitors, no phone calls, no contact with the outside world. He's essentially buried alive. That information should have brought satisfaction, but mostly I felt empty. Vincent Romano getting what he deserved didn't bring back our first child or erase the trauma Emma had endured. Justice was important, but healing mattered more. Marcus, I want to thank you for everything you did to help us. Thank you for trusting us to finish what you started. The intelligence you provided saved lives and brought down a criminal empire that had been operating for 30 years. After ending the call, I found Emma in what would soon become our baby's room. She was painting the walls a soft yellow, the same color we'd chosen in Pennsylvania before Vincent Romano destroyed our first chance at parenthood. Second time's the charm, Emma said, noticing my expression. This time, everything's going to be perfect. This time, I'll be ready for anything. Emma set down her paintbrush and took my hands in hers. Mike, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't spend this pregnancy looking over your shoulder for dangers that don't exist anymore. Vincent Romano is gone. His family is destroyed. We're safe here. She was right. Vincent Romano would die in prison, probably from violence inflicted by inmates who despised criminals who hurt women and children. The Romano crime family would never reconstitute. Emma and our unborn child faced no threats beyond the ordinary risks of everyday life. I promised to focus on our future instead of our past. Good, because our future is going to be amazing. That evening, we sat on our back porch watching the sunset paint North Carolina hills in shades of gold and orange. Emma was reading a baby name book while I worked on plans for a swing set I intended to build before our son or daughter was old enough to use it. What about Grace? Emma suggested. I still love that name if it's a girl. Grace is perfect. And Michael for a boy? After his father? Actually, I was thinking about David. It means beloved, and this child will definitely be beloved. Emma smiled and leaned against my shoulder. David it is, then. David Mitchell, beloved son and living proof that good things can emerge from difficult times. As darkness settled over our new home, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. 8 months ago, I'd been a construction worker hiding from his military past. Emma had been a kindergarten teacher planning a nursery for our first child. We'd been ordinary people living quiet lives. Then Vincent Romano had shattered that quiet life with senseless violence, and I'd been forced to become Colonel Michael Mitchell one final time. The mission had been successful. Vincent was neutralized, his organization destroyed, justice served completely. But the real victory wasn't Vincent's imprisonment. The real victory was Emma's laughter, her growing excitement about our coming child, and her complete recovery from trauma that could have broken her permanently. Mike, do you think we'll ever tell our children about what happened in Pennsylvania? Maybe when they're older. They should understand that sometimes good people have to stand up to bad people, even when it's dangerous. And they should understand that their father is a hero. I'm not a hero, Emma. I'm just a husband who loves his wife. Same thing. Later that night, after Emma had fallen asleep, I walked through our new home and thought about the life we were building together. In 7 weeks, our child would be born into a world where Vincent Romano was just a name in old newspaper articles. Emma's attacker would be nothing but a forgotten criminal serving multiple life sentences in a Colorado prison. Our baby would grow up safe, loved, and protected by parents who understood the difference between justice and revenge, between necessary action and pointless violence. I'd spent 25 years as a soldier, 8 years pretending to be a civilian, and 3 months operating as something between the two. Now, finally, I could be what I'd always wanted to be, Emma's husband and our children's father. The war was over. Vincent Romano had lost everything. And Mike Mitchell had won the only victory that truly mattered, the chance to grow old with the woman he loved, raising children who would never know how close they'd come to losing their mother to a monster's rage. Justice had been served. Healing was complete. Our new beginning was just getting started.